So now we have Ruth and Jim. And Ruth Fine is curator of special projects in modern art at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, and the organizing curator for the Dorothy and Herbert Vogel Collection, 50 Works for 50 States project. Fine was curator of modern prints and drawings at the National Gallery from 1988 to 2002. She has written on artists Romare Bearden, Helen Frankenthaler, Sam Gilliam, Jasper Johns, John Marin, and Mark Rothko, as well as on contemporary print publishing workshops such as Crown Point Press and Gemini GEL and Graphics Studio USF. I don't know how she finds the time, but Ruth is also a painter and printmaker and a longtime friend of Jim Dine. So, it used to be a ritual to write to Jim Dine every single year and invite him to Tamarind. And it was Jim's ritual every single year to write us back a polite postcard, which was where he went wrong, declining. But our persistence paid off, and finally in 2000, Jim agreed to come to Tamarind. He worked on a wonderful collaborative book that time with Robert Creeley, and since then he has been a frequent visitor to Tamarind. For Jim, printmaking has always been a primary form of expression. He made his first lithograph at Pratt Graphics Center in 1960, followed closely by numerous projects at ULAE. And by now he has made, I think, almost 1,000 prints, many of them lithographs. He engages fully with the medium, always pushing the boundaries. He said himself that, quote, his biggest problem in life is staying within the borders, unquote. For us, that's not a problem. In fact, it presents challenges that enrich the process. The alchemy of lithography is well suited to his incredible drawing skills and interest in transformation. Jim generously gave us his edition of Double Dose of Color, which is the big double bathrobe print that you saw in our gallery last night, as an anniversary gift. So we would like to express our gratitude by giving him a gift today. Although, admittedly, it's hardly of equal stature, we want Jim to be comfortable while he's here, and we don't want him to forget us. So we have something that we thought would be familiar enough to make him feel better.
It's like a study in embarrassment. Oh, man.
I almost
So, Jim.
Oh, he's going to model it for us even better.
I'm quite sure you're listening.
Okay, there he goes. Yeah, turn around.
Perfect. And I'm never coming back.
Well, I thought he was going to leave it on. We're delighted to have Jim and Ruth with us today, so here's the rhyming duo, Ruth Fine and Jim Fine.
Very great. I'm just going to run through a group of images to give you a kind of overview from the 60s to the 2010s. I'm not going to talk about them, but just to put some images in your mind before we start talking. There are a variety of media, as we'll find out. Jim is a lithographer and everything else as well. That's a painting on the left. There's one painting, one sculpture, which is the obvious, and one drawing, just to make the point that it really is not only an integrated body of print processes, but an integrated body of painting, sculpture, drawing, and prints. The image on the left is the drawing, obviously the sculpture. see, or you can just start talking without the images. We decided this is the part of the day that has all the old people, and the early part was the young people, and this part was the old people. So Jim and I were talking about being the old people. You want to talk a little bit about being the old people?
No, just that I said to Sarah, too, I mean, she's cutting off a great client base by only wanting younger artists. What is this? What is this? I mean, we're still, you know, those of us that can still move our hands, we might be able to do something someday. It's so damned insulting.
That was our lunch conversation in a nutshell.
I was really pissed.
So, Jim and I had our first tape conversation on 26 September 1990. I went back and checked. It wasn't a public conversation, but it was a tape conversation leading up to the graphic studio. So there have been lots of nice conversations, taped and untaped. But could you talk a little bit about the role of prints? Ever since the beginning of your career, they've been important to you, but no more so than anything else. So put it in context.
No, but they have been continually important from the beginning, from the moment. You know, I was 17 and I bought a book for myself. I kind of raised myself, and I bought a book for myself on my 17th birthday. I found it, I'm from Cincinnati, in a bookstore, and it was called Modern Prints and Drawings by a guy from the Fogg Museum, Paul Sachs. And I had been aware of prints, but I wasn't sure what it was. But in this book, I saw what really struck me the most was woodcuts, the woodcuts of Nolde particularly, and I saw that I had a desire to cut wood, and I thought I could do this, and I did it in my basement, my grandma's basement where I lived, and I'm dyslexic and left-handed, and I always could visualize what it was going to look like, the reverse, which I thought was a little magical. So I just loved it from the beginning. And I went to art school and learned a little bit of the chemistry of lithography and etching, but I'm very impatient and was aware that I was either going to give my life to learning the technique of doing this, or I was going to have to get somebody else to do it, and I'd have to figure out a way to do that, to get this other person. In the meantime, when I was 19, I worked for Gustav von Groschwitz at the Cincinnati Art Museum, matting one of the biennials of color lithography, so I was able to touch prints. And it was a great sensual experience. And not just the Miros or Picasso. It was, there were American regionalist lithographers who had laid ink upon ink to make an image, and I found that so exciting.
This is in the 50s.
This was in 1954. And I went off then to Ohio University in Athens, and I had this idea that I was in a yokel school with a bunch of hillbillies, so I took myself to Boston Museum School and stayed for a semester making woodcuts with a guy called Turid Banks. And he didn't say much to me, and all I did was just use a chisel and keep on cutting. And I left. I had a bad scene with a girlfriend or something, and I went back to Ohio and really got down to business of painting and drawing and making sculpture, and also printing. I would continue, I never stopped printing. And when I came to New York in '59, I had known a guy at Ohio University called Andy Stasek, and he was running the Pratt Graphic Arts Center. So I went there, and he introduced me to this woman called Nono Reinhold, who was a guest printer from Holland. And she printed, and I hand-colored a series of dry points. And then I did a series of lithographs with Emiliano Serini. And I never stopped after that. Jasper Johns took me very generously to Tanya's, Grossman's, and I made a print. And for me, printing is as inspiring as anything else one can do as an artist. And it's especially inspiring to me in this way that I cannot tell you why. I feel best when I'm printing. I stayed away from hair for years. Because it was Albuquerque, it was too far away for things. And I came only because I was a friend, my dear friend was the poet Robert Creeley, and we wanted to do a book together, and we did it. And that's where I met Bill and Marge and Sarah, who printed, I think, most of the images with Bill. And then Marge and I seem to have had a disagreement, which she doesn't remember why, and I don't either. But it's for sure, we didn't speak for a couple of years. But it's very curious, because I love Marge, and I thought she loved me. So, but we eventually made up, and it will never change now. We both slit wrists and touch blood. And it's always the same, though. When I'm here or when I'm printing in Paris, the printers and I have a rapport. It's a lonely thing to be a painter. It's not lonely to make prints, because you're talking with somebody who's facilitating it for you. Their genius is like yours. They've got the same intention of facilitating the artist's invention. But the friendship is very important to me. And I look forward to it always. And I've had really good friends as printers. And most of them are still alive.
Why don't you talk about some of them? I mean, you've worked, really, Paris is further than Albuquerque, I think, and Germany, and
I know it's not.
distance, isn't it, really? But talk about, you've talked about some shops have one kind of character and others have another kind
You
of
get a
character.
different kind of print at different shops.
Yeah, could you talk about
Sure. For instance, I printed for a couple of years in Copenhagen with a printer called Niels Borg Jensen, who was an intaglio printer. And the shop was filthy. And he wiped plates with the phone book, and it was all over the place. It was really up my alley, too, I'm telling you. There was fingerprints on everything. And in his spare time, he made pastrami. He made his own. But I mean, the guy was into this, into cooking somehow. So you got a kind of print from him that was very visceral. And the only reason I stopped ever going there again was he refused to share secrets, which I could not have. I wouldn't refuse to share secrets with him, but he refused to tell me how he got certain effects in prints. And fuck you, I'm not doing this. Life is too short for this kind of stuff, You can't tell me how you put ferric chloride in some kind of viscous glue. I mean, forget it. So I never went back, but at the same moment I was printing, and I printed for 30 years with the great, great French printmaker, etcher Aldo Crumlink. And I printed with him until he came to America, and he would come to America and then go back to Paris. And I printed a little bit with him in Paris then, but by that time he had trained other people, and I preferred printing with them because everything he did was slick and chic and had an elegance to it that actually I was quite happy with, in the sense that it was accurate. It was exactly what was on the plate. But I wanted more. I wanted to feel his hand. I always want to feel the printer's hand. And, but we had a great, great friendship until he died.
Talk about his shop.
His shop?
Yeah, just describe it.
His shop was like to the right of Mayo Clinic. It was just like an operating theater where nobody spoke. All he did was chain smoke, and he told me a few things how to do certain things. Otherwise, he left it to me, and he was quite timid and shy, and once I showed up, the British artist Richard Hamilton was there, and Richard Hamilton's way of working and his art is really suited to Aldo's way of working. They're accurate, and they want this, and they get it, but Richard is a lovely man. And anyway, I showed up out of nowhere from America. I came in and said, do you mind if I work? And he never wanted another artist there. When another artist was there, he was so discreet. But I was aggressive, and I did this, and I brought a grinder with me, an angle grinder, and plugged it in, and I started to grind off what was on plates before, and my way of erasing. It's one of the things I've done for myself, is to figure out ways to subvert the manual, the trade manual. I make it mine. And one of the ways I erase a copper plate is I use different grits of carborundum on my grinder until I can use steel wool and get back to almost to white. Copper was flying all over the room, and it was landing on Hamilton's pristine grounds. And Cromlech had to leave. He was so embarrassed. He wasn't angry, he was just embarrassed.
How does that one feel?
Well, he was embarrassed to know someone as primitive as me. But it was always a pleasure. That was the sort of pleasure one had in working there. Here it's a great pleasure because to work with Bill, but also always having these young people here. It's energizing. You don't make work for just yourself. And you're aware that people are looking at what you're doing. And it's a way of giving. I mean, if they have half a brain, they'll look and see what I'm doing, because I've done it so long. I just can't say enough about how lucky I've been, not just to be born an artist, but to have been a printmaker.
How does it work when you start a print in one medium at one shop and you want to add another medium at another shop? How do you sort of coordinate that, or how does it happen?
I take it with me. I take it with me. Mm-hmm. I'll take prints and we'll proof it, and then I'll have it sent. Or I for a long time, because of my impatience, I hand colored. So I would just be like a machine and hand color. They'd pull off, and I'd hand color, and they'd pull off and hand color. It was always a little different, but I never left the hand coloring on top. I would always put if it was a lithograph that I was hand coloring, I'd put an etching on top. And it was like a great sandwich that went together, And I have no problems with that sort of thing, combining mediums. I do it all the time. And I've been using, recently, I found a guy in Germany where I live part of the year, who's a wonderful commercial digital printer. That means I also have a place in Germany where I work where they make superb scans. So I get the scans to this guy, and the German paper mill, who I always used sometimes for lithography, but mainly for etching, is called Handmüller. And they also make it a printer, a paper for, like Epson prints it. Mm-hmm. And this guy, Stefan, turns out a reproduction, a digital reproduction, that is a little psychedelic because it's so true to the original. And I've been getting him to print for me these, whatever I give him, an image. Sometimes it's a painting I give him. Or he'll take a painting of mine and he'll scan it himself and then put it in. I'll say I want it blown up. Then on top of that we'll put etchings or lithographs. I never use it by itself. I think it's a little dead, digital things. I know. that it's not really if you are of a certain generation, but for me it's a little dead. But it's a useful tool. I'm just giving an example of that versus, like that. Rauschenberg once said that, he said, when you could take a tire and dip it in mud and roll it across this room on a sheet of paper, you got to print it. And it's true. It's
And
true.
he did it.
Yeah, and he did it.
San Francisco Museum of Fine Arts has
Right.
it. He did modern art. Huh. Any, are you usually working in prints and paintings and sculpture all at the same time?
Yeah, sometimes in the same room. In Paris, I never had a painting studio for a long time, and I would have canvases delivered to the lithographer. So in between, I could be painting. I don't have too much trouble painting in front of people. I can tune it out, and I don't find it embarrassing what I do. So, yes, all the time. And in Walla Walla, where my principal studios are, in Walla Walla, Washington, I have an etching press and a litho press. So while we're printing, I go in the other room and paint and draw. Or I run off to the foundry, the bronze foundry that's there, and then I come back and they've got a proof for me. It's a wonderful life. Really.
Talk about your peripatetic nature, and do you leave things in one place and come back to them a year later? Do you take them with you?
You mean the images or my underpaints?
Whichever you want to talk about.
No, I usually leave my underwear in different places. I never have to carry them. But I do carry with me a lot of times drawings in tubes, or I carry ideas on my back all the time. And all my life I've had this restless soul, and it energizes me. I can be working in Walla Walla, and I promise you I can conjure up the boulevard in Paris, and I know it's time to get going, to get on the move again. So I finish what I can finish, and then I get to Paris, and I've got stuff I started before, and it's fresh because, I've been away a while.
And is it the case that you use different materials? I mean, materials specific to places that you buy in France, or not that you can't get everything at every place.
Now you can get
Now you
everything
can.
every place.
Yeah.
30 years ago in Paris, there would be certain things I could find that I couldn't find in America.
And you would leave them there and use them?
No, sometimes I carry them with me back to America. But now, it's silly. I'm not very hung up with technique, in the sense that whatever works, I'm very, very appreciative of. So if I can't get a color one place, I'll make another color work.
You've talked over the years about correcting being your method. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
My method is correcting. I put down a line, I erase the line. I put down another line, I erase that. I'll grind it off, I'll put something on top of it, then I'll take that off. I like to build up a history in the work, and it just suits me. I go through a lot of erasers a year, and I use almost exclusively these days charcoal because it's easier to correct, and it's more physical too, I found. I've been making a series of drawings outside this summer, and it's a perfect thing to work with outside. You're not getting the dust in your face and everything. But I correct in sculpture too. It's the biggest frustration I have in making bronze sculpture is it's too expensive to correct. But once it's cast. But I've been carving wood for the last 10 years, and that's my assistant, and I correct all the time. We cut arms off things and put them back on and peg them, and that's just my method. That's all. And I feel it brings life to the subject. It's got coincidentally, the wooden sculptures I've been making, for the most part, are of Pinocchio. And I went from being Pinocchio was a very important story to me as a child. I went from being Pinocchio to Geppetto. And so, and it's a kind of metaphor for making art. The Pinocchio story. Here's this woodworker who's given a talking stick, and he carves him into a puppet, and through a series of trials and tribulations, this puppet becomes a human, a boy. And it is what we try to do, you know, is to take this, whatever it is, you know, paper, ashes, you know, smoke, or whatever it is, perfume, and we try to make it into art, make it come alive. It doesn't matter what it is. The great artist, the great German Icelandic artist who was my friend in the 60s and 70s, Dieter Roth, I mean, he made art. He made it out of shit, he made it out of cheese, he made it out of salami, you know, it didn't matter, it's beautiful.
What other, in addition to Pinocchio, what other childhood stories, childhood memories have played an immense role in what you've done as an adult?
Besides Pinocchio? Well, I was brought up with my grandparents, and my grandfather had this idea that he could do anything with his hands. I mean, as a carpenter. And so he had a lot of tools. He couldn't do anything. But he had the tools. And from the time I was 2 years old, I remember he was very generous with me and allowed me just to screw around with them and play with them. And I became enamored with the object. Not necessarily what the object could do at that point, but the object itself seemed like a primary object, or something, a thing of beauty. After all, these basic tools, the hammer or saw or the pliers, they evolved not through some graduate design course, but through the use of people working with their hands to make it. To me, that just got me every time. And then when I was in grade school and high school, I worked in this story head where it was a hardware store, and I spent as much time as I could literally arranging them, fondling them, and figuring out why these were any different than, let's say, the Venus de Milo. You know, why was a paint chart, color chart, you know, why was it less beautiful than Mondrian? Oh, you know what? And you see the way glaze was put on a bathroom sink in the most beautiful, sensuous, rich way. I realized that I was surrounded by a glossary of terms. Eventually could become a glossary of terms for me. So it was very inspiring. Still is. And as soon as I made any money at all, and I got a job, when I was sold painting. I remember the summer of '62 was the first time I had sold a couple of paintings. I went immediately to the hardware store and bought new tools to put into paintings and to draw from. I knew I had arrived. But, most of the time I don't like old tools, because it's like somebody else's mystery. I like a new tool. It's hopeful.
And what about the Venus de Milo? How'd she enter in?
She entered into my life. My mother was very, very interested in ancient culture. That means she went to the opera, and she had postcards from the Louvre, of the 19th century, and the Venus de Milo. So I always knew this was something that was special. And as I got older, I associated it with art stores, art supply stores, where there was a little plaster model of it. And in the late 70s, I started to paint still lifes, quite reasonably realistically, and included this memento mori of of the Venus de Milo, about that big. I knocked the head off. I didn't want it too personal. And then I started to paint it and make it like another icon of mine, like a heart, like this robe, like the Venus de Milo, like tools. I don't have a big vocabulary of content, obviously, but I use these things because they're mine. I made them mine. I use these things to hang my feelings on, to hang paint on, and to infuse with ideas and emotions about various things.
A few years ago, maybe 2 now, maybe last year, I lost track, there was an interview with you in the art newspaper, and the headline was something like, I spend more time with poets than artists, or I'd rather be with poets than artists,
Well,
something like that.
It's true. All my life I've spent more time with poets than I have with artists, with painters, let's say. Poets were always so generous. There was no money involved. There was no money for them, and what I was doing had nothing to do with them. You know, so it was easier to get along. Plus, all my life I've written poetry, so words have been terribly important to me. And I, in a year, spend probably as much time on my poetry as I do on making three-dimensional art. But also, as I said, I'm dyslexic. And it's the thing that saved me, poetry, because I could never get through a novel when I was young. And I would read, and I still read them backwards often. I start at the back, go the other way. But with poetry, it was just a few words and a few lines, and it always grabbed me in my stomach, in my heart.
Did you start writing poetry as a child?
I started writing poetry in high school. A psychiatrist said to me once, you know, you think you're stupid, but it's that you can't read, and you should therefore practice reading. You know, which I did. I do. I mean, I try to read every day for that reason. Otherwise, it's not that I'm becoming illiterate, but it does mean that I can express myself better.
Dreams, psychiatry have all played a role in the evolution of your art?
Yeah, I mean, everything's Christopher Mill, and all my experiences, and because of my arguably troubled childhood, I've spent a lot of years with psychiatrists, with analysts, and for the most part it's been very enlightening, but art saved me, not psychiatry, you know.
Just to get back to printmaking for a minute, I've often wondered to what degree the nature of prints as multiple originals, however variant they may be, was important, and how much just the actual processes that you can do in
Well, I couldn't care
prints.
less about the edition. Makes no difference to me. It could be 1, could be 100. As long as it's what I want, it doesn't matter. I don't consider it, let's face it, it's not art for the people. It's pretty expensive, you know. So this isn't a political statement. No, it's making the print that I care about. And I hope, and I have confidence, the people I collaborate with are interested enough to keep the quality at the same level from 1 to 10. You know? Otherwise, who cares? I do 1, and that's really enough for me. I mean, I don't need to see 2 of the same things next to each other to get a thrill. I love other people's prints too. I mean,
For example?
Well, I love Picasso's prints more than I like his paintings, for instance. You know, I love Rembrandt's prints. I love Morandi's prints. I love Edvard Munch. I once made a small film for the BBC on the life of Munch, and I got to go to the Munch Museum where they have every stone just leaning like that. you know, like that. There must probably 1,000 stones. And I couldn't believe it. It was like a dream. You know, you have a dream sometime and there's 1,000 monk prints in a room, you know. You wake yourself up. It was great.
But his way of, his woodcuts really had a kind of direct connection with some things you did after you first saw them.
When I first, with Don Seff, didn't I make it with Don? At the graphic studio, the woodcut bathrobe. Monk developed this technique, I guess he must have developed it, of like a jigsaw. So every part of the thing was cut out. It wasn't gouged. It was just cut out with like a little saw, and everything was inked a different color, so which did influence me, yeah, a lot.
I don't want this to sound like a plug, but there's an amazing exhibition of monk prints at the National Gallery, if any of you are here. I think it's still up, Washington, and remind me to send you the book.
Thank you.
It's multiple proofs, and it's really,
Well, that's,
for anyone who loves prints, it's an extraordinary show.
it's states that are interesting. I love the states of prints. So it's like watching people grow physically. And it's highly interesting. And Picasso was great with states, but also taking, I'm thinking of the lithograph of the bull, and a realistic print, and keep on reducing it for, I guess there must be 10 or 12 or 14 states of it. It's so moving. Yeah, really great.
Do you ever, years later, go back to a plate and rework it?
I do it all the time. When Cromlech died, I had over 100 plates there, and I had them sent to Wawa. And every summer we bring out the chestnuts and grind them away and make new prints. It's a great pleasure, and a vast treasure trove of grist for the mill.
What about photography? That's been something that entered into your life, into your work with greater importance. Probably, what was it, around 1995, I think?
Well, about at the beginning of the 90s, I took up with this woman who's a great, great American photographer, and she taught me, she happens to be my wife, but she taught,
has a name.
Diana Mitchner. Thank you. I know this embarrasses her so much, and I'm going to get so much shit for it that
No, I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it. Don't worry.
Anyway, we had lessons, as it were, in photography. I mean, I asked her specific questions that I was never able to ask anyone else, because I was so interested in what she was doing and her passion for her art and for photography. And so I couldn't control myself any longer, and I started to photograph. And I had one bout before at Polaroid, when they invited me to work with a big camera in the end of the 70s. And I tore up almost everything, which is too bad, because I liked a lot of the things that were left. I liked it quite a bit. But then, anyway, she spoke encouragingly to me. And at the time I was teaching in Berlin and painting there in the middle 90s, and I met a guy who was a litho printer, but he was actually at a photo studio. And Diana and I went there, and he printed platinum prints. And I was starting black and white photography, and I was photographing certain things. And he said, you ought to let me make a plate for you, an oleogravure plate. And I said, well, what is that? And he showed them to me, and they are copper etching plates done with aquatint, but it's an old process. It's the way Stieglitz printed camera work with oleogravure. It was once a commercial printing technique. And so I started first getting real satisfaction from photography through oleogravure, and having the people who print my etchings in New York print the plates, because he was a lousy printer, but a great plate maker. And what I was getting was something between an etching and a photograph. It's very warm, beautiful blacks and grays. And from there, I wanted to do, I went to David Adamson, who's a digital printer in Washington, D.C. And he had come down, I met him at an opening in New York, and he said, come down and see what I can do. So we showed up down there, and he showed us what he could do. And for a few years, I went down once a month in a black room he had with a beautiful camera, with a Schneider lens in a digital back, and I set up things. I wrote poems on the walls, and I photographed them in color. This is all in color. And I set up things, still lifes, or constructions I built there. And I printed them very big, say a meter by meter 50. And it was very satisfying until two things happened. One, it was very wet, very hot in Washington. And I was sweating. And I must have gone like this, like that. And I hit the paper with sweat, and it started to run. I said, David, I don't understand this. He said, well, that's just, you have to frame them. They will, you could screw them up if you spit on them or something. I said, okay. I tried to put that aside. So then I had this big photo show about 3 years later in Europe, and I showed, it was actually a black and white 5-panel photograph. It was about 10 feet long, finally. And I said to Diana as we were installing the exhibition, it's magenta. And she said, what are you talking about? I said, the photograph is no longer black and white. It's magenta and white. And I realized it was Rogue inks. And they really were lying. He told me there was 150 years guarantee that they were light fast, and it's, they were lying, that's all. Now somebody was lying, probably not David, probably Epson, Since then it's quite different, quite different. But, so I stopped doing that and I went to silver photography, silver printing and chromogenic printing. And Diana found a wonderful printer in Paris for both of us. And that's where I print mainly now, my photographs. My photographs are not shown anymore commercially. I'm not interested in that. It's my gift to myself. I don't have to think about it then. And I give them to a foundation in Germany that is the keeper of August Sanders' photographs and Hilla and Baron Becker. So I feel I'm in good company. And I photograph all the time, and a couple of books. Yeah, it's an important part of my life, but like I say, it's a quieter part for me.
Has it had an impact that you discern on your work in other media?
In printing, certainly. In printmaking, certainly. So I've used the oleogravures as the basis for etchings, or put on top woodcuts on top of the photographic image, or I've ground away part of the image, laid in litho in the middle of it, something like that. Oh yeah.
But what about looking in through a camera and framing an image that way? Has that had an impact?
I'm a very good composer of things. So I love doing that, and I also love cropping. So that maybe has had an impact on how I draw, I don't know. But we haven't spoken about really is the main thing I care about, and where all this comes from, is drawing. And it's a thing that all my life I've tried to teach myself to do. I know it's the way an artist can speak clearest is by being able to do what your heart demands with your hands. And it can be done only, for me, through drawing. And I don't mean it as a form of weightlifting or anything like that. It is a means to an end, and it's a way for this visual language to be clearest in your idea onto the page. I know that. And so I've spent my whole life trying to teach myself to be a draftsman, trying to make my left hand do something, do what I wanted it to do. And that's one of the reasons I love printmaking. Because what I do in printmaking is more about drawing than painting.
You've also made some pretty extensive environmental drawings,
What do you mean?
filling spaces with drawings.
Oh, you mean the Kunsthalle in Germany?
Yeah.
Oh.
How is that kind of experience really?
Well, you probably don't know this, but in 95 or 4, a woman came to me. She ran a Kunstverein, which was an artist club in outside of Stuttgart, in a place called Ludwigsburg. And she said, would you like to come and make wall drawings in our place? So I went down and looked at it. It was a beautiful little space, done in the 19th century. And I said I would. And I went there, and I made, I guess, about 10 big drawings using charcoal, mainly charcoal. And they were 15, 16, 17 feet high. But I had to make a pact with her and with myself that they weren't going to stay there. She had a show to put up after mine. So we painted them over. But it was a great privilege to make a drawing that big, not to have glass over it, and to feel the charcoal, the physicality of it.
Yeah, and it's recorded in a book. So
In a film, actually. Yeah,
Isn't there a catalog as well?
maybe, but it's not. I don't think it's as good as
I
the
think it's
film.
at the scale.
Yeah, you see it in the film.
Well, we've gotten our 5-minute signal a few minutes ago, so I just want to ask one last question, just since we're in the context of the university. You've taught over the years, and I've had the sense that you've enjoyed teaching over the years. I wondered if you might talk a little bit about that.
You had the sense I enjoyed it?
Yeah.
You couldn't be further from the truth.
Well, you were good at it then.
Teaching
I had to get the
teaching
gap.
isn't even the right experience.
You know, I met
Right.
some wonderful people teaching, and I don't feel I changed anybody's attitude to anything. I never made anybody a better artist because nobody can do that for you, and so therefore there's nothing to teach. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed being in Germany doing this. I went to Salzburg for 3 summers to teach at the International Summer Academy, and I met wonderful people, and that was about the extent of it. But I really don't think, that's why I think Tamarind is just fabulous. It's that people come here to go to a trade school, and they come out with a trade. It's very moving and extremely practical. Extremely practical. To get a master's degree in painting is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And that's one of the things that really moves me about Tamarind. I mean, this mission is fantastic. I mean, lithography is not going to go away. We're not worried about that. But training people to perpetuate it, and then, come on, game's over, it's great. Anyway, therefore I thank all of you for the award yesterday, and I'm going to keep on making lithographs. That's,